Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the November edition of the National At-Home Dad Network's webinar series. My name is Matt Strain, and we're so glad to have everyone joining us today. I do apologize for the slightly late start to things. Unfortunately, technology, isn't it fun? We had some little bit of technical difficulties, but we have everything worked out. I greatly appreciate everyone's patience. And without further ado, we can move on to this month's guest. Our guest today is Dr. Aliza Pressman. Dr. Aliza is a developmental psychologist with nearly 2 decades of experience working with families and the healthcare providers who work with them. She's an assistant clinical professor in the Division of Behavioral Health, Department of Pediatrics, at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai Hospital, where she co-founded the Mount Sinai Parenting Center. More importantly, and what many of you know her from, is she is the host of the hit podcast, Raising Good Humans. I'm not going to lie, I was not familiar with the podcast. After hearing about her and beginning to work with her, I've since become an avid listener. I think I've done about 12 episodes in the last 2 or 3 days. But without further ado, I'm going to bring on Dr. Pressman, and we can hear about the new book that she has coming out, The 5 Principles of Parenting. So,
Thank you. Hi. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here. And again, I do apologize for the little snafu with us somehow being in two different studios with the same name.
This is the world of living in our computers.
It is. It really is. So, again, I just started listening to the podcast, and this podcast has been around for a while. I've never really been a podcast person. I do audiobooks. Mostly because they don't have commercials.
But I know, and there's no option to not have a commercial. It's so annoying.
Well, and again, you know, you got to pay the bills. Yeah. I mean, I totally understand it, and but as I said, I recently started listening to the podcast, and the list of guests you have is fantastic. I mean, you have brought in literally a who's who of parenting.
Yeah. It's been pretty great. I really love it. And I get to work with so many people in my day job that don't have access to larger audiences. So having them on the podcast to highlight their work, because a lot of them are in academia and just they are the biggest influencers in everything that we know, but no one's heard of them. And some of them are huge and people have heard of them as well, but it's really great because I get to be super careful and curate what research I'm bringing forward to parents, and it's awesome. So yes, I'm glad you started listening. You can fast forward the ads.
I do. And I will point out one of the things that's really refreshing about your podcast, and again, this is nothing against other podcasts, but I love the fact that you bring in things and you talk about parenting largely from an evidence-based scientific background, which, I'm a data wonk. I can't lie. Yeah. I mean, I love having those little crunchy bits that tell me, okay, this isn't just personal experience or someone's opinion. This is based on a double-blind study of this many thousands of people, and it's phenomenal.
Thank you. I'm so glad you appreciate that, because I feel like we have the playground and our friends to ask personal stories and opinions, but I want to deliver the science because that to me is very soothing. The science is soothing. And you put your own values into it and your own personality and your child's temperament, and you're the expert on your child, but with this information so that you can make the best decisions about your personal parenting.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, for everybody watching, please understand, feel welcome to type questions into the chat if you have questions for Dr. Pressman. Also, do you prefer Dr.
Aliza.
Pressman?
Aliza's
Aliza?
fine. Yeah.
Oh, good Lord. I'm sorry. It's Aliza, not Eliza. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
my name is clearly spelled wrong because everybody says that.
So if you have questions for Aliza, feel free to tap them into the comments, whether you're watching live on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn. We'll get the questions here and we'll be more than happy to relay them. We already have one here. One of our members, Tony Hernandez, brings up he would love some advice on getting his 15-year-old, who's a ninth grader, to tell the truth about struggling at school.
Okay. So I'm guessing that, well, I'll tell you a couple things. And just to pitch this, that is a whole section of this book about like getting kids to tell. So go pre-order it. But I can't tell you how hard it is to get kids. I mean, that's kind of the key, is how do we get our kids from the earliest years through forever to feel like we are someone they can come to when they're struggling. And if you have a 15-year-old who isn't coming to you, that's when you want to reflect, is the reason they're not coming to me because they're struggling because they are worried about my reaction, or because of reactions I've had in the past, or because they want my approval? And those are the kinds of questions that they're one of the 5 principles that I talk about, which is reflection. You really need to figure out before you try to get anything out of your kids, what's this bringing up for me and what might be happening for my child? So my guess is that it's one of those things where either the expectation is that they're not struggling, or maybe they've done really well in the past and gotten praised for it, and now they're struggling, so they don't want to admit it. Or maybe they're afraid of the consequences, and so they don't want to admit it. And so the key is always to figure that out first before you have any conversations, and then lead with that. Hey, I wanted to check in with you because I feel like I want to know anything that you're struggling with, anything that you're feeling like is more challenging than you expected, because I'm here for you and we can troubleshoot. And there's nothing you could tell me about how you're doing in school that I don't understand, from both the experience of having been in high school and also because I get it. And if I seem like I would be disappointed and you're afraid to tell me, or like fill in the blank of whatever it is that you think they might be worried about, you could say something like, the story I'm telling myself is that in the past, I've looked at your report card and been really hard. And so now you don't feel safe telling me what's going on. And I want you to know that that's a me problem, not a you problem, because the way you're going to best thrive is by having my support, whether you have an F or an A. This is what school is about. It's about figuring out the strategies to be able to do what you want to meet your goals. And now, if the reason that you're not hearing about the struggles is because it's like your child's struggling to have goals, or because, maybe they don't care that they aren't doing well and they know you'll care, then you could say something like, we've never talked about this, but I wonder, what are your goals for high school? What are your hopes for after high school? And how can I help you meet those goals? Because for some kids, it's getting straight A's so they can go to the best college, so they can get a job at blah, blah, blah. And for some people, it's like, I don't want to go to college, so I don't care how I do, or whatever. And then it's saying, well, what do we need you to do to get to your goals? And if you just want to graduate high school, you still need to graduate high school. So what's that about, and how can I be helpful? So I think the lifting of the weight of what has been in the past a reaction would help. And just saying, like, I know this is going to sound out of character, but I'm really here for you. And if I've given you the impression that this is about your performance when it's really about your growth, let's change that talk.
Yeah.
And just listen.
Yeah. And Tony brings up a valid point. He points out that he was consistently a great student until COVID.
That makes
And
sense.
again, COVID was
COVID
such a line in the sand for
Yeah.
so many families.
I think that is very true. And so acknowledging that and just saying, and also I wouldn't cling to the past like that, because also the change between, let's say he was in sixth grade or fifth grade when COVID started, and now he's in ninth grade. That's a big, wait, would be sixth grade, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a big developmental jump from elementary school to middle school to high school. A lot of kids do well in elementary school, and then because they did well without a lot of effort, when effort has to happen, they're like, yeah,
That was me.
like, wait a minute, I got straight A's without any effort, and now this is a struggle. And when you combine that with not learning the school skills because you're busy with a pandemic, it's hard to spend your middle school years developing the skills to be able to do high school. Because really, middle school is a practice for high school and building up those muscles to be able to really have the capacity to handle high school. And that group of kids missed that period, both socially and cognitively. And so it's just a matter of saying, like, look, you got an extra challenge. Let's figure out how to make this a little bit more strategic.
So, yeah, I mean that does make a whole lot of sense. Now, one of our other viewers, Danny Mercer, asks a really, really great question that I put up here on the screen, because a lot of our community, we're, as fathers, we're the primary caregiver. My wife works at a hospital. She's a psychiatrist, working in the emergency department, which, is a relatively high stress job. And I'm handling most of the day to day. And I'm sure, just like so many other parents, there are areas where our opinions on parenting differ.
Yeah. Yes, I have a chapter called Raising Good Parents. So it does touch on that relationship and parenting styles, and when you have different parenting styles. And I'm happy to just give a very short answer to parenting styles, which is, it's typically that we fall into the bucket of one of three parenting styles. The fourth one is neglect. You're not here if that's your parenting style. You're definitely in a self-selecting group of extremely not neglectful parents. So that's one thing. But it usually is between authoritarian, and permissive parents. And when you are authoritarian, you have a lot of control, a lot of expectations, not a lot of sensitivity. A lot of because I said so. It's more fear-based. When you have sensitivity of care alongside the expectations and the, all of the stuff that's like, you got to do this, and what would be perceived to maybe more as authoritarian. If you also include sensitive caregiving and an emotional connection, you have yourself authoritative parenting. And the other extreme is permissive, where none of the expectations, none of the control whatsoever, and all the sensitivity. And the sort of sweet spot, of course, is the pretty middle, which is very boring, which is you got boundaries and expectations and you're sensitive. But not every parent can harness that at all times, and not every parent believes that at all times. So the data will, maps to that style of caregiving, that approach is going to be your best bet for child outcomes, like intellectual and social emotional outcomes. But if you were not raised like that, it's hard to do.
Yeah.
So you need to have real conversations.
I can see that. Now, I'm going to take a little breather right now for just 1 second and point out to everyone, Aliza's book comes out in January is when it's released. It is available for pre-order right now. And as part of our monthly book giveaway, our November book giveaway is a pre-order of her book, The 5 Principles of Parenting, meaning if Amazon sticks to what they usually do, it will show up on your doorstep the day it releases.
Yes. And if you pre-order now, you can get a chapter on resilience. It's the chapter that talks about the 5 principles kind of broken down. Thank you, Danny.
Just thought I would point out, Danny has already ordered the book.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you go to draliza.com after you pre-order, it'll tell you how to put in your order number, and then you'll get, oh, thank you. And then you'll get the resilience chapter. Full disclosure, it's before it went to the last round of copy editing. So there are typos that drive me crazy, but they're not going to drive you crazy because, well, maybe if you have the same kind of, you'll see some typos, and they're very minor, but any typo drives me nuts. Mm-hmm. So this goes through the 5 core principles of parenting and the 5 skills that you can teach your kids that are highly linked with resilience. So I picked that chapter because it was like, on people's minds the most when I sort of did a informal poll. But I think that the part of the conversation we always have to have is, what is our experience being parented? And how is that influencing our parenting? And what are the good parts we want to take out of that experience? Like, I really liked how connected I was with my mother, or I really didn't like the fact that my parent was a yeller. And
which actually segues really well into this question that Arvis Burkeen had, which is, how do you co-parent with a parent who doesn't want to adapt to another parenting style?
Okay, so I'll tell you this, Arvis. It just takes one parent willing, or caregiver willing, to have that Goldilocks parenting approach of, sensitive and connected, but also having appropriate limits and boundaries. It only takes one. So if your co-parent isn't up for it, then they're making a choice about a different kind of relationship that they're going to have with their kid. And it's totally okay because they've got you. And I'm not knocking the co-parent. They might be a wonderful, well-meaning parent who just doesn't believe that these certain, like boundaries are important, or who just doesn't believe that expectations and limits are important, or who does, but doesn't believe that sensitivity and connection is important. And that's going to impact how your child communicates with them. Who do they go to when they're struggling? Who will they come to when they need help? Who will they come to when they're sad? Who will they come to when they've got an exciting piece of news? So but you can't control a co-parent. You just can't control another person. You can give them my book as a present.
That is a good plan. I know that my wife and I occasionally will differ on parenting styles. We're 2 different generations. There's almost a 10-year difference between us. I was born in 72. She was born in 81. So we grew up with very, very different parenting styles. I was a latchkey kid. We were feral and sent out into the world, and just, we were supposed to go away and come back to eat and not be seen or heard. And it wasn't a great experience for me at all. So I've done a relatively good job of adapting to a much more caring parenting style and a much more involved parenting style. One thing that we do, and I don't know if you touch on this in your book or not, but we will never countermand each other in front of the kids. Even if one of us makes a call that the other one doesn't agree with, that's something that we can discuss, the 2 of us, down the road, after the kids are in bed or while the kids are at school, which, first of all, shows the kids the united front. And honestly, second of all, usually gives whoever the one is that's not pleased with it a chance to cool down a little bit before we start talking.
It's a great thing to do. And yes, I do cover it in the book, what to do if you fight in front of your kids or disagree in front of your kids. And ideally, as to your point, like you want to present a united front when you can. And when you can't present a united front, either because it's just too hot button or because you just don't have that kind of relationship, then at least don't say mid argument, we're going to take it in the other room, and then not tell your kids that you resolved it. Because it's much
Yeah.
worse for kids to see the beginning of a fight and that it didn't
And
resolve,
not,
because then they
and not
imagine.
to the end.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
ideally you take it in the other room before it, and you say, hey, partner, hey, co-parent, I wanted to address this, but not in front of the kids, but I really feel like we should not give the keys to the car after 9 p.m. I just made that up. Or I don't believe you should give stickers for potty training, or whatever it is. But let's talk about it and make a decision together. And then we'll come to a conclusion where we either say to our child, okay, we don't totally agree on this, but this is what we're trying. Or, we came to this conclusion. This is what we're going to give you the keys on Saturdays at 4 p.m. You have to be home by 7. You ideally, again, keep all that decision making behind the scenes. But if you do argue in front of your kids, finish that, let them know that you have, in an adult way, in a productive way, argued and come back together with a decision. And that actually models for kids that relationships aren't all hunky dory, but they come back with repair. And of course, if you're divorced or were never married or you don't live together, it brings in other issues. But you always, and I do address divorce and not living together, but even when you have a great marriage, we have disrepair and disagreements, and that is okay, right? Like,
Yeah.
in fact, if your kids grow up thinking that nobody has disagreements, and if they do, it's over, that's so scary.
Yeah.
Right?
They're going to get out in the real world and be terrified.
Right. And they might have a fight. They might have a romantic relationship and have one argument and be like, well, I guess my parents never argued, so I guess we must be over now. So I'm not pitching arguing in front of your kids all the time, but if you do, I would not. But my feeling is you will, even when you have the best relationship. And so more often than not, don't. But when you do, make repairs and know that you're kind of doing your kids a little favor, because they're seeing that relationships are stable, even when things are a little tense.
So Danny also pointed out, your book description online uses the phrase, normalize imperfection, which seems to be what you're talking about right here.
That is exactly what I'm talking about. Imagine a world where you have a perfect parent. Your dad was perfect, and you grew up and found out that you are not perfect. And now you are working your whole life to be as perfect as your dad, which you will never attain because he wasn't perfect, but maybe just pretended to be. And you hate yourself and you question yourself. Whereas if we normalize imperfection, if we say, listen, I wish I hadn't responded that way, or, I'd like to have a do-over, or I don't like how today went, this happened to me, or, I made a mistake at work, or whatever it is, you're normalizing mistakes. You're normalizing that there is no such thing as perfect. And every time you do that, you are putting in you are filling their bucket of not being a perfectionist. And perfectionism is not about high achieving. It's not about conscientiousness. It's about really self-loathing and like worrying about how you come across to yourself and others. And we don't want that for our kids. Like, if you really break it down, every time you make a mistake, thank you, Kyle. Every time you make a mistake, you are letting your kids know that mistakes are forgivable and they get to be imperfect. And that is, if we all grew up with a deep belief and sense that we are not less than when we make mistakes, that's a lot. That's a gift.
Yeah. Now, Arvis brings up another question here. And again, I live this daily. My wife works doing emergency psychiatry at a major state hospital, and I still don't know how she does it every day. I really don't. What's your driving force that keeps you doing what you do?
I think my driving force, and one thing is like I do a few things in the same umbrella of developmental psychology, but I work at a hospital, I have a podcast, I like have a private practice. Like I have ways to dip my feet, dip foot, whatever, to dip my toe into
There we
different
go.
things. And so I'm always like, it's different populations, it's different types of ways of thinking, different ages. So it's always interesting to me. But ultimately, I deeply in my bones believe that the science of resilience that tells us that one adult caregiver who helps you feel seen and connected and supported, who has appropriate boundaries and limits, can move the needle from toxic stress to tolerable and positive stress, and that can be the thing that changes how kids can grow resilient. And that changes the world to me. And it's doable by a parent. And that to me is like empowering, because we have no control over anything in the world. You cannot control socioeconomic status. You cannot control what house you live in. I mean, relatively you can, but like we can't just like magically create our own neighborhood. We have to be within the confines of whatever it is that are limiting us, from work to money to family to whatever. You can't control your teachers. You can't control the influences in the world. You can't control systemic racism. You can't control war, but you can control your own response to your kids. And the fact that that makes a difference, like a statistically significant difference, and changes how the structure of our brains work and how we grow, to me, it's like, get that word out however you can, whether it's individually, whether it's in curriculum that I create at the hospital, whether it's teaching pediatricians or individually with parents or in book form or podcast, who cares? Just want it out there.
Now, you want a couple of things that you brought up just now. One of your more recent episodes that you did on your podcast, you tackled a really tough subject. You literally talked about how do we talk to our kids about what's going on in the world today?
Yeah.
How do we talk to our kids about what's happening in the Middle East, or about the racial issues that we're having across the world and in America? And all these are tough times. And I mean, I'm sure when my grandparents were raising my parents, they went through the tough times too. And when my parents were raising me, there were tough times, but I honestly don't remember them ever explaining any of it to me. It was just kind of one of those, the TV was on in the background. I
Yeah,
saw
you
the
figure it out.
news, and yeah, I'd figure it out eventually.
I think the TV on in the background was a way of raising kids back in the day. And I think it's terrible, because the TV on in the background, like I remember when the shuttle exploded. They like we all watched it live on TV. I'm sure I'm so much older
That's
than
cool.
everybody.
That's cool. They brought us in the gym to
At school,
watch the launch.
I was brought to the library and we watched it on live, and like I remember it so vividly. And I remember like the story, there was like some movie the morning after, and it was like, what would happen if there was a nuclear war?
Oh, the
And
day
like
after. The
the
day
day after.
after.
Thank you.
That was it.
That's it. And these were like things that happened, and then nobody would talk about it. And it was just like these massive ideas that you were supposed to figure out as a kid that made no sense and were totally scary. And so I think when combined with the fact that the world has news sources that we don't even know if they're reliable and social media, we have to be the people that deliver the information first and reliably to our kids with our values, because otherwise the world is imposing their values on our kids, and it's too important. So like, I'm not going to tell you what to think or what your values are, but like I go through a big exercise in the book about figuring out your family mission statement and your family values because they're all different. We each come with such different histories. But if we don't help our kids unpack what they're hearing about in the news, if they just overhear other kids talking, and it's not just with the news and like all the like just horrible stuff that's going on. It's also things like sex ed. It's also if you don't teach your kids and have open communication, someone else is going to put their values into your kids before your kids have heard about it from you. So of course the world's going to give their input, and it's kind of cool because the kids get to hear different perspectives and whatever. But if they're just learning from the outside world and not from you, how are they going to know their core moral compass that is aligned with your family? There's no way to do it if you don't talk, or if you're like, I'm going to let everybody else talk about that, or, oh, they're not going to hear about that, so I'm going to avoid it. I don't think you should put on the news because it's terrifying and really hard to understand. Like, I don't think any adults understand it, especially if you find yourself yelling at the news or arguing. That's a sign that like it's too much. It's too much for us to bear. So how can we ask that of our kids? But we can pull out a couple of articles and say, hey, you may have heard. I wanted to know what you've heard. What do you think of this? Let me tell you what I understand, or let's learn this together. And that helps them not feel like adults have lost their minds. And like there's something so scary when nobody's saying anything, but there's just like something that happened in the news. People are whispering, but no one's sharing with you like what's going on. So I think it's really important to tackle those hard conversations with your own set of history and values, and saying, like our world would be such a better place if we could both share our values with our kids and also help them imagine other people's perspectives and respect them. Like it seems like a low bar, but it's so hard. And part of that is because kids just watch. And when they don't ask questions, we assume they're not curious and we don't name things. And they watch and see everything. Like we need to name what's happening for that reason. Otherwise, they make up stories in their head.
I can totally see that. Now, one thing. Oh, yeah. Sorry, new comment came in right as I was trying to yeah, I get that. I mean, you've got that one engaged partner versus the more hands off, and it can be important.
Yeah.
But again, at the same time, in our home, I'm a little bit more hands on, not out of more desire or more caring. Honestly, just opportunity. I'm here when they come home from work, whereas other people might not be.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, what is the relationship that you want? And if you're working constantly, you can still have an incredible relationship with your child. Yeah. And if you're home constantly, you could still have a crappy relationship.
Now, one question I'll ask is that recently your 41st episode, I think this season, was the one about building resilience in your kids. This is something that I've been running into an issue with my youngest. My son is 6 years old. He's in first grade. He's a great kid. Love the kid to death. At some point in the last 6 months, we have lost the ability to deal with disappointment in any way, shape, or form. Like the moment that we request something or something doesn't go our way, we go from perfectly happy to hysterical crying, and there's no middle ground, no acceleration, just 0 to 100.
Okay. Well, so let's say this, and that is exactly why I chose the resilience chapter, because I feel like that's the one that's on our minds, because it's like, how do we? There's a quote, a Maya Angelou quote that I'm going to mess up, but it's essentially, you can tell a lot about a person by the way they handle these three things: lost luggage, a rainy day, and tangled Christmas tree lights. And so there's big resilience, like big R resilience. That's like, how do I raise my child to be able to manage trauma and setbacks and terrible things? But there's little R resilience that is, how do I help my kid handle tangled Christmas tree lights and, like something disappointing? And that kind of resilience requires this two things: the relationship with the parent, and those relationship, reflection, regulation, rules, and repair. And then skill building in the child. And for skill building, I use the acronym GAMES: gratitude, autonomy, motivation, empathy, and self-regulation. So you want to build those 5 skills in your kids through the 5 principles of the relationship, reflection, regulating yourself and helping your child regulate, having appropriate boundaries and rules, and repair when there's mistakes. Now, with your child, one of the biggest things for resilience to me, which I think comes out in reflection, is, how does my child's distress make me feel? When my kid can't handle something that I think is no big deal, or that I think is a big deal too, am I flooded with cortisol, stress hormone, panicked because I hate seeing them upset? Or am I able to take a beat, breathe, and say, they're not being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. They just are pissed that they can't do X, Y, or Z. I can stay with the boundary that I have and the expectations that I have, and I can handle their distress in a loving way. So I'm not going to fix it for them. And every time you don't fix it, but are still loving, like, you empathize. I see how sad you are. I'm not expecting you to like it, but we still have to do it. You are building their capacity for resilience because they're seeing that you can handle distress because you don't think it's an emergency. But we need our kids to believe that feelings are not dangerous. So we can sit through hard feelings, and they come and they go and they suck, but they're not dangerous. So we're not going to upend the day and change the plan because our child had a hard feeling. We're going to love them and wait it out with them.
Now, one of our viewers right here, Dane asked, any advice on setting boundaries as the child grows without it feeling like you're just moving the goalpost?
You are moving the goalpost. Do you know what I mean? Basically you're saying, well, 2 things about that. The first is that, and I love the phrasing of that. The first thing is, if we imagine widening the circle of freedom that our kids have over the years, that's kind of moving the goalpost, because what you're saying is you over time are going to develop more and more skills such that I know you're not in danger emotionally or physically when you have more freedom. And that's going to grow and grow. And if we find that we gave too much freedom and it was not the right thing, we might move it again and come back and say, I know I said you could have social media, but I realize the way you've been handling it, you're not ready for it. And that's okay. Let's build the skills. So I have somewhere in here a freedoms list. I can't find it right now. I have somewhere in here a freedoms list where you work with your kids to list the freedoms that they are hoping for, whether they're 4 years old or 14 years old. And what they're hoping for might be being allowed to make their own breakfast, or being allowed to get dressed on their own, or it might be being allowed to drive the car. Well, that would be 16 or 18, but and so they write down their freedoms, and you look at it together and you say, okay, so as your parent who's responsible to making sure that you're emotionally and physically safe, those freedoms you are not ready for yet on this part of the list, but these freedoms, I think we can work on those. And then let's check back and have meetings. And every few months we can be like, let's look at that list and see if your skills have grown more. I've noticed that you've been really self-regulated and careful. And I think it's time that you can walk yourself to school. but you wouldn't just, so in a way, you are moving the goalpost, but it's not, it's intentional. You're not like haphazard, like moving it. Does that answer that, Dane?
I would hope so. Yeah, I do have to say that walking yourself to school thing just really hit home hard. My kids go to school half a mile from the house. And from my daughter's first day of kindergarten, I have walked her to school and walked her home. And she's in fourth grade now. And she's begun talking about well, can't I run, can't I do that by myself? And I've told her point blank, you're fully capable of that, but I'm not ready to let you do that because I still want this time.
That's a good point too. My daughter just got her driver's license and she said something to me like she wanted to drive somewhere at night. And I said to her, it's a me problem, not a you problem, but I'm not ready for this yet. And we will get there. And I'm not proud of this, but like, this is, but I think like it's fair game to say, I actually think you do have the skills to have that freedom, but I'm not ready for it. And we both have to be ready.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Now, I'm trying to think about how to put this. So the first episode of your podcast that I ever listened to was the podcast that you did about immunizing your kids against alcoholism.
Oh, that was your first one?
Well, let me explain. I'm an alcoholic. I'm an addict. I've been in recovery now for almost 10 years. I'm also in the process right now of getting certified in the state of North Carolina as a substance abuse peer support specialist. So honestly,
it was the one.
The alcohol one is the one that I'm going to jump on for the first one on everybody's thing.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. Like, honestly, like hit the nail on the head in so many places. But I'd love for you to share some of the things that came out of that episode with our audience, because it's everywhere. I mean, it's not something you can keep your kids away from, like, unless you just lock them in the house forever. Drugs and alcohol are a part of society at this point.
Yeah. And I think, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, maybe all of you knew this, but I didn't. So I would say that, first of all, Jessica Leahy wrote a book called The Addiction Inoculation, and I highly recommend it. But here are a couple takeaways that I think are really important. One, exactly what you just said to your kids is super important. Acknowledging addiction, acknowledging dependence, acknowledging not like sweeping it under the rug, and not being ashamed, but being like, hey, this is something that my body is not able to respond to. So I need to cut it out completely. And I need to let you know that that's a completely reasonable thing to be vigilant about, because some of it is genetic and some of it is environmental, and we don't know. And so as your parent, I'm going to do what I wish somebody had done for me, which is say, this is not on the table. Like, my expectation is we are going to let your brain grow before you figure out whether or not you want to try substances. The reason being, the longer you wait to try them, the lower the risk of having dependence. And so when you start drinking or smoking at age 13 or 14, you have an exponentially higher risk of having addiction than if you waited until your brain was more fully developed. And so I think sharing information with your kids in a not scary, but just like, hey, listen, if you had a predisposition to diabetes, we would probably treat sugar differently. Like, that's my job. And since we don't know, like, nobody says you're going to be one of the 10% of the population that's going to have this reaction. Let's just like delay for all kids. There's no reason. And what we also know about addiction is that the idea that you like make alcohol available and not off limits and like don't make it a secret because then it's not so appealing, doesn't work. It doesn't translate. Like the way the Europeans do it, they have higher rates of addiction in substances other than OxyContin. But for
Yeah.
alcohol, that's a nice American thing. But for alcohol, Europe did not figure it out by having it be easily accessible. They have massive rates of addiction. So I think substance misuse is misunderstood, and then we are so like wanting to be the kind of parents that either say no, full stop, but I'm not going to talk to you about it, or I'm a best friend, I want all your friends to come over and I'll give you the alcohol so you're safe with me, is also, it's, we know from the research that access is linked with addiction. It's not the reverse. You're not like, oh, now that I know that I can have it, I'm not going to have it. It doesn't work like that. So I think the most important message about it, like with everything, is your relationship and reflecting on your experience and sharing with your kids, not to scare them, not to shame them, but to talk about your experience so that you can serve them with safety.
And again, for anybody who's tempted to be that parent that wants all the kids to come hang out at your house, my parents were not that parent, but one of my friend's parents was. And even if you're okay with that for your kids, there's a lot of your kids' friends whose parents probably wouldn't be okay with it. Just a personal thing.
I think that's important to point out also, because as your kid, for those of you who have kids who are 13 and older, I would say, you might have a household where that you don't have the kind of kids that are going to like drink off the bar cart, and they're just not sneaky, and they're not curious about substances. And it's just like completely not part of your household culture. They have friends, to your point. And so you want to make sure that that there are certain kids that cannot have access to things because they will not be safe. And that will be on you as your responsibility. But on the other side of it, you always want to tell your kids, look, when you make a mistake, when, not if, I still want you to know that you will be much safer sharing that with me than whatever the consequences are not sharing it with me. So you will never regret calling me if you did make a mistake so I can pick you up. Ever. You'll never regret that. And also, of course, I have an expectation that you're going to not do those things, but I am still your parent and I love you no matter what. And I want to be the person you call when and if that happens.
Absolutely. Now, a couple of people have brought up work ethic lately in the comments, and as well as just on our community in general. As kids are getting older, how do we instill that work ethic? Again, kids have ADHD, some of them have anxiety issues. I mean, some of these play factors in them reaching their
together.
goals.
Yeah. Well, okay. So with neuroatypical, like ADHD, I think it's important to let those kids know your brain is not built for necessarily the exact way that the school is teaching. So we're going to figure out the best way for you to learn. And this may not be your jam, and that's okay. We're going to help support you to give you the best tools that you can so that you can get, have the success that you can have. Now, one thing that I love to tell kids with ADHD is, do you know how phenomenal it is when you are interested in something? Because your light switch is on way more than anybody else's. It's like, if you are in, you're in deep. And let's find a couple of things where you get lit up so that you get to see how powerful that brain is, that ADHD brain. It's just not powerful when it's not motivated, because an ADHD brain is like, I'm not interested, I'm out. And so there are some have tos that you just have to do. Like, you're not interested in those classes, but you have to. But let's emphasize what you are curious and interested in so that we can show you how baller you are when you are interested, because that will serve you for the rest of your life. You're not going to always have to do the have-tos in the boring stuff of school, if school is, part of the, or some of the subjects are challenging, but we have to get you through it so that you can get to the place where you get to do the thing you're really interested in and thrive. Anxiety is, which by the way, as for those of you with kids with ADHD, you know that they're what's called comorbid. They tend to come hand in hand. And because of course it's like anxiety provoking to know that your system gets set off in different ways. So again, naming that and finding strategies and tools, and obviously we don't have time today. And I will say, like, that's all part of the resilience building. You want to emphasize those skills: gratitude, autonomy, motivation, empathy, and self-regulation. Growing those self-regulation muscles helps your brain recognize when it's a false alarm going off, meaning you're not going into fight, flight, or freeze because you are being chased by a bear, but because you have a false alarm that's anxiety telling you something's wrong when it isn't. And so you want to recognize and get practice knowing when an alarm is real and false. Like, when should the police come? And when were you just like, I don't like this feeling, so it feels like there's an emergency, but there isn't an emergency. And really getting to know the difference, not because you're undermining the feeling. The feeling is there. And I don't ever want you guys to say to your kids, like, that's not a real feeling. It's not that the feeling's not real. It's that your brain might hear that the feeling is an emergency that needs to send you into fight, flight, or freeze. And that is not serving you. So practicing that by having, small exposures and surviving feeling anxiety, moving through it instead of taking it away, can really help kids grow that muscle.
Well, I can't tell you how thankful I am that you guys reached out to me. This has been amazing. I highly suggest to everybody watching, if you're on Instagram, if you're on social media, follow Aliza. Follow her. Like, I follow her on Instagram, and she posts regularly. I'm also really glad to see someone else do awkward live moments as badly as I do. That always feels weird to me. But follow her on social media. Visit her site, draliza.com. Her book is available for pre-order. Again, it's our Book of the Month free giveaway. You can go to any of the social media channels that the National At-Home Dad Networks uses. We're on Instagram and X, which used to be Twitter, as @HomeDadNet. Facebook, we're Home Dad Net. You can find us on LinkedIn at the National At-Home Dad Network. And again, our website is athomedad.org, where it's easy enough to sign up for our newsletter and the rest of it. One thing that I will bring up, and I'm going to be a little self-serving here, where are you based out of? I'm not looking for your address, but like, what region of the country are you in?
It's a little funny because I run the Mount Sinai. I'm a co-founder of the Mount Sinai Parenting Center, which is at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. But I moved to California during the pandemic. So I work very much remotely.
So you're over on the West Coast.
So I'm on the West Coast.
Okay.
And Raising Good Humans podcast is on the West Coast. But I was in New York when I started it. It's just that the producers are out here. But so I'm in, oddly, like, two opposite parts of the country constantly.
Yeah. Well, again, like I said, I'm completely self-serving in this. And the reason that I bring this up is that one thing the National At-Home Dad Network does is we throw a convention once a year. We like to refer to it as professional development for professional dads.
Oh my God, I love that.
This particular year, Home Dad Con is going to be in St. Louis, Missouri, October 17th through the 19th. We're going to be at the Drury Hotel downtown. Literally, it's the Drury Hotel at the Arch. Like, the Arch is about 2 blocks away from the hotel. And it'll be, 3 days of learning and support and honestly companionship, getting to be around other dads who are that at-home dad, whether they're working from home, whether they're just the primary caregiver. You are the kind of speaker that we would love to have at our conventions. We do this once a year. This year is going to be
so cool.
this year is going to be our 28th convention.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's been going on for ages. We were in Phoenix. We were in Milwaukee this past September. We were in Phoenix the year before, which was a little bit closer to you. But we move the convention to a different city every year so that other people get an opportunity to come.
Yeah.
Because not everybody can afford to pay for the plane ticket or, the incursion that it takes to fly out somewhere, especially when you're the primary caregiver, because you have to coordinate that with your partner, so that there's somebody taking care of the kids while you're gone. And for those who it is a financial burden, there is the Brian Dixon Memorial Scholarship Fund, which I believe is open now. If you go to our website and click on it, please apply for the scholarship. The money's there for a reason. It's there to help more dads get to the convention.
I have to say, that sounds incredible. And also, dads are, in my experience, the dads who are in are the most incredible dads, because it's not expected in the same way. It's just not. And so when you've made the commitment to be a committed dad, it's like the ADHD brain, like you're in bigger.
Well, and honestly, that lack of expectation is something that a lot of us are pushing back from hard. That there is really nothing in the world more annoying than when someone treats me like I'm some sort of super dad.
Totally.
And I'm not doing anything special. I'm grocery shopping,
parenting
with my kids. And if my wife was doing that, no one would even look at her twice. But because I'm male and I'm a dad, somehow I'm just like absolutely beyond everything.
Oh yeah. It's wild. It's wild, but it's cool that you guys are normalizing just like being a dad.
Oh, now hold on. Danny just threw in a question, and good Lord, this applies in my house as well. We both have a 9-year-old who is a gifted child. I think that is called advanced academics here.
They're trying to change the name from gifted now because of the pressure. So I have a 10 o'clock Zoom, but I want to say this because it's really important for kids like that. When she gets her grades, particularly with kids who just are always doing well in school, don't ask what their grade was. Don't comment on it. Don't make it a part of the conversation so that they aren't getting more reinforcement that A+ mattered. It might matter to her, but you can just be like, oh, how did you feel about lunch today? Like, for some kids, you want to emphasize like they worked really hard and they got their A+, and that's such a big deal, or they got a B and like they were getting Ds and this is so amazing. But for this kind of kid who's going to feel valued for her academic achievement, take that off the table. Like, it's not why you love her. Your love for her does not rest on those accomplishments, so that she can internalize, not that it does for you, but you just have to work harder at making sure she understands that like who she is what matters. And oh, you got an A+. Cool. Anyway, moving right along. You know what I mean?
I do. Well, look, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Aliza, this has been an absolute pleasure. Again, the podcast is Raising Good Humans. The book is The 5 Principles of Parenting.
Yes, pre-order.
Pre-order it now, or sign up for the giveaway. And if you don't win, pre-order it after.
Totally.
I know that you have somewhere else to be. I don't want to make you late for your next call. So I won't keep you here to sit through me going over what our next month's webinar is going to be.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me and trusting me. And I appreciate all of you.
All right. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye.
Bye. So for those of you who are here, I do want to point out next month, we have our webinar happening on December the 19th. This is one of the first times I will have ever done a webinar in December. Usually I dodge it because we're all busy and it's the holidays, but I had an opportunity to bring in a guest that I've been trying to get on the webinar now for almost 6 months. I have Pierce Freelon coming in. Pierce Freelon is a Grammy-nominated artist, a picture book author, founder of Galactic South, a boutique children's media company. He co-created the PBS Kids podcast, Jamming on the Job, and is the voice of its star, Beatmaster Boombox. He's a dad to 2 creative and hilarious kids, loves reading Octavia Butler books, watching Star Trek The Next Generation reruns with his wife of 16 years, and is local to me here in Durham, North Carolina. Pierce recently put out a family album. I dislike the term children's music because when someone says children's music to me, that implies something that my children will love and will annoy me. The music that Pierce does is fantastic. I listen to this as a grown adult and enjoy it. The new album that he has done is called Ancestors, and a lot of the album has to deal with death and the acceptance of death and the celebration of death from the perspective of ancestors and family and culture. And it's a tough topic to talk to kids about. So Pierce is going to come on December the 19th, and we're going to talk about it. And it's going to be absolutely fantastic. We're going to be meeting with him at 10 a.m. Eastern, which I know for y'all on the West Coast, that's going to be early. It's going to be 7 in the morning. The replay will be available if you want to sleep in. I totally understand. On behalf of the National At Home Dad Network, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in December. Have a great day. Bye.